March 15th, 2019. Oklahoma. Temperature 32 degrees. Wind gusting to 65 miles per hour. The kind of storm that strips the pride right out of a man and leaves him naked against nature's fury. Under a concrete overpass on the outskirts of Tulsa, where the interstate cuts through forgotten America like a scar, two men were about to discover that brotherhood doesn't recognize rank, patch, or circumstance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The storm had been building all day, dark clouds rolling across the plains like an invading army. By 9:47 p.m., it was a full-scale assault. Rain didn't fall, it attacked. Each drop hit the asphalt like a bullet, creating a percussion that drowned out everything except the howling wind that seemed to come from every direction at once. Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez had been riding for 18 hours straight, pushing through 3 states to reach his chapter's emergency meeting in Kansas City. His 2016 Harley Street Glide, customized with chrome that usually gleamed like a mirror, was now battered by the storm. Tank was built like his nickname suggested, 6'2", 240 pounds of muscle earned through 20 years of riding hard and living harder. The Hells Angels patch across his back told part of his story, but not the whole truth. Tank had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before the Brotherhood found him. The transition from military structure to civilian chaos had nearly broken him. The Angels gave him purpose again, a code to live by, brothers who understood what it meant to carry invisible wounds. But tonight, even Tank's considerable toughness was no match for Oklahoma's fury. His fingers were numb inside his riding gloves. Water had found every seam in his leather jacket, soaking through to his skin. The Harley's engine temperature was climbing dangerously high, and the visibility was down to maybe 10 feet. When the lightning started, turning the night into a violent strobe show, Tank knew he was out of options. He guided the bike under the overpass, grateful for any shelter. That's when he saw him, a figure huddled in the shadows, wrapped in what looked like a military surplus poncho, sitting on an old milk crate beside a shopping cart. The man was watching the storm with the kind of stillness that comes from having nowhere else to go. Samuel Patterson had been 19 when he first heard incoming mortars in the jungles of Vietnam. Now, at 68, the sound of this Oklahoma storm brought back memories he'd spent 50 years trying to forget. But Doc had learned long ago that some fights you can't win by running. So he just sat and let the memories come and go like the lightning overhead. Doc's story was written in the lines on his weathered face. In the careful way he moved his left leg where shrapnel still lived beneath the skin. In the Purple Heart he kept wrapped in plastic at the bottom of his cart. He'd been a medic with the 1st Infantry Division, 2 tours, Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers out of a rice paddy under enemy fire. But that was a lifetime ago. 3 years ago, Doc had been living in a small apartment on his disability checks, volunteering at the VA hospital, helping younger vets navigate the system that had nearly swallowed him whole. Then came the 3rd heart attack. Bypass surgery, 6 months of recovery, medical bills that devoured his savings. An eviction notice that arrived the same week he was cleared to go home to an apartment he no longer had. The streets of Tulsa had become his new battlefield. Different enemy, same war, cold instead of heat, indifference instead of bullets, but war nonetheless. Doc had adapted. Homeless shelters when the weather was worst, the overpass when he needed solitude, the VA parking lot when he wanted to remember what purpose felt like. His cart held the archaeology of his life. A change of clothes, canned goods, a small camp stove, the Bible his mother had pressed into his hands before he shipped out to Southeast Asia, and a tarp that had kept him alive through 3 Oklahoma winters. Now, watching this leather-clad giant struggle with his motorcycle in the storm, Doc's medic training kicked in. He could see the early signs of hypothermia in the way Tank's hands shook, the way he held his shoulders. Doc had seen men die from exposure in Vietnam. Temperature didn't matter. Wet and cold could kill you in July or January. "Brother," Doc called out, his voice carrying despite the wind. "You're going to catch your death out there." Tank looked up, water streaming from his hair. surprised that anyone was talking to him. Most people crossed the street when they saw the patch on his back. "I'm all right, old-timer," Tank said, but his voice was tight with cold. Doc stood slowly, his arthritic knees protesting every movement. At 5'8" and 150 pounds soaking wet, he looked like a strong wind might blow him away. But there was something in his posture, the way he carried himself, that spoke of steel beneath the worn exterior. "No, you're not," Doc said, pulling the poncho tighter around himself as he approached. "And neither am I if we both freeze to death being stubborn." Tank had been sizing up Doc since the moment he'd spoken. Military bearing, despite the civilian clothes. The way he moved suggested old injuries, but also old training. Tank had served with enough veterans to recognize a warrior, regardless of what uniform he wasn't wearing. "You military?" Tank asked, still shivering beside his bike. "Was. Long time ago." Doc gestured toward his cart. "Got a tarp that'll fit over that bike. Wind's coming from the east, so the back of this overpass'll give us some protection." Tank looked at Doc's setup. It wasn't much, a small space carved out of concrete in desperation, but it was dry. More importantly, this old man was offering to share it with a complete stranger wearing colors that made most people think twice about charity. "I don't want to crowd your space," Tank said. Doc's smile was tired but genuine. "Brother, I learned a long time ago that being cold alone is colder than being warm together." They worked in wordless efficiency, two veterans who understood that some situations called for action, not conversation. Doc helped Tank position his bike deeper under the overpass, then draped his tarp over the machine to protect it from the driving rain. Tank noticed the practiced way. Doc secured the corners. This wasn't the old man's first storm. Doc's home was a masterpiece of necessity. He'd arranged concrete blocks to create windbreaks, positioned his cart to provide additional shelter, and cleared debris to create a level sleeping area. A small camp stove sat on a flat piece of concrete, and Doc's few possessions were organized with military precision. "Sit," Doc said, gesturing to a second milk crate he pulled from behind his cart. "Coffee'll be ready in a few minutes." Tank lowered himself onto the crate, which creaked but held his weight. He watched Doc work, heating water in a dented metal cup, measuring instant coffee with the care of a chef, preparing a fine meal. The ritual was soothing, a small ceremony of normalcy in the chaos of the storm. "Name's Tank," he said, accepting the steaming cup. "Doc," the older man replied, settling onto his own crate with a soft grunt. They sat in comfortable silence, two men sharing warmth and caffeine while nature raged around them. Tank found himself studying Doc's face in the dim light that filtered through the rain. There was kindness there, but also hardness earned through experience. This wasn't a man life had treated gently. "Vietnam?" Tank asked. Doc nodded. "2 tours. You?" "Afghanistan. Twice." That simple exchange said everything that needed saying. They were brothers in the way that only combat veterans understood. The specific wars didn't matter. What mattered was that they'd both seen young men die for causes politicians couldn't explain, had both carried wounded friends to safety, had both come home to a country that thanked them for their service and then forgot they existed. "This your regular spot?" Tank asked, looking around the makeshift shelter. "One of them. VA parking lot when I need to remember what I used to be good for. Shelter when the weather's really bad. Here when I need to think." Tank processed this information. "How long?" 3 years. Doc's voice held no self-pity, just facts. Heart attack led to surgery. Surgery led to bills. Bills led to eviction. Funny how fast things can change. The storm intensified, if such a thing was possible. Lightning cracked overhead like artillery, and the wind howled with renewed fury. Tank felt the inadequacy of his own situation. One bad night on the road versus 3 years of surviving on the streets. "You could have just let me freeze," Tank said. Doc looked at him over the rim of his coffee cup. "Could have. But where I come from, you don't leave a man behind." "Where's that?" "Same place you come from, I'm thinking. Place where brothers look out for brothers." As the hours passed, the storm gradually diminished from apocalyptic to merely miserable. Tank and Doc found themselves talking with the easy familiarity of men who'd shared foxholes, even though they'd met only hours earlier. Doc's story emerged in fragments, like pieces of shrapnel working their way to the surface. He'd been a medic with the Big Red One, specializing in battlefield trauma surgery, the kind of work that saved lives under conditions that would break most people. After Vietnam, he'd used his GI benefits to become a paramedic, then an ER nurse. 40 years of saving people, one emergency at a time. Retired in 2016, Doc said, refilling their coffee cups. Figured I'd earn some quiet time. Maybe do some fishing, visit my sister in Colorado. What happened? Doc touched his chest unconsciously. Ticker started acting up. Turns out 40 years of high-stress medicine and 30 years of cigarettes don't mix well. First heart attack came at the grocery store. Fell over right next to the milk cooler. Tank watched the old man's face, seeing the frustration beneath the acceptance. Insurance covered the surgery, but not the recovery time. Lost my apartment while I was learning to walk again. Tried to get help from the VA, but you know how that goes. Tank didn't know. The VA was a bureaucracy that moved like molasses and had all the compassion of a computer program. Good people working within a broken system, trying to help more veterans than the system was designed to handle. Family? Tank asked. Sister in Colorado's got her own problems. Son died in Iraq in 2004. She's not interested in taking on another broken soldier. The weight of that statement hung in the air between them. Doc had given 40 years of his life to helping others, and when he needed help, there was nowhere to turn. Tank found himself sharing his own story. Growing up in East LA, joining the Army to escape gang life, discovering he was good at fixing things, vehicles, equipment, broken units that needed a strong NCO to get them back on track. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Coming home to find that civilian employers weren't interested in his particular skill set. Angels found me in a bar in San Bernardino, Tank said. I was about 6 months away from eating my service weapon. These guys rolled up, started talking to me like I mattered. Turned out half the chapter was military. They good people? Tank considered the question. They're my people. Code we live by is simple. Brotherhood above everything. Help those who can't help themselves. Never leave a man behind. Doc smiled at that. Sounds familiar. Should. It's the same code you live by in the jungle. The same one that made you pull me out of that storm. They talked through the night. 2 veterans sharing war stories and civilian struggles, finding common ground in their uncommon circumstances. Tank learned that Doc still volunteered when he could, helping at the VA hospital, talking to younger veterans who were struggling with the transition to civilian life. Hard to counsel someone about getting their life together when you're living under a bridge, Doc said with dark humor. Maybe that's exactly why you can help them, Tank replied. You've been where they're going. You know what the bottom looks like. As dawn approached, the storm finally exhausted itself. The rain diminished to a steady drizzle, and the wind dropped to a whisper. Tank checked his phone. 6:23 a.m. He needed to get back on the road if he was going to make the chapter meeting. But something had changed during the night. Tank couldn't just ride away, leave Doc under this bridge, pretend this conversation had never happened. The Brotherhood's code was clear. You don't abandon your own. Doc, Tank said, standing and stretching muscles stiff from sitting on concrete all night. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. The old man looked up, curious. If things were different, if you had options, what would you want to do? Doc was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gray morning light. I want to matter again. I want to help people like I used to. I want to wake up somewhere that felt like home instead of just another place to hide from the weather. Tank nodded. Hold that thought. I need to make a phone call. Tank walked to the edge of the overpass, out of Doc's earshot, and dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. This better be important, Tank. I'm supposed to be retired. Morning, Bull. It's important. Bull Richardson was president emeritus of the Oklahoma chapter, a man who'd earned his position through 40 years of living the code. He was also the closest thing Tank had to Devra code. a father figure, the man who'd sponsored Tank's membership and guided him through the Brotherhood's traditions. Talk to me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tank told him about the storm, about Doc, about the night they'd shared under concrete and stars. He described Doc's service record, his current situation, the dignity with which he carried himself despite having nothing. How old? Bull asked. 68. Any family? Sister in Colorado? But she's got her own troubles. Bull was quiet for a moment. Tank could picture him in his kitchen, drinking coffee strong enough to strip paint, thinking through the implications. What are you asking me, Tank? You know what I'm asking. Another pause. Then, you vouching for this man? With my patch, if necessary. That carried weight. Tank was vouching not just for Doc's character, but putting his own standing in the Brotherhood at stake. Where are you now? Tank gave him the location. Stay put. I'm making some calls. This is going to take a few hours to set up properly. Bull? Yeah. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're about to find out how much this old soldier's word is worth. While Tank waited for Bull's call back, he helped Doc break down his makeshift camp. It was a process that spoke of long practice. Every item had its place. Every movement was efficient. Watching Doc work, Tank saw echoes of the soldier he'd once been. You expecting company? Doc asked, noticing Tank's frequent phone checks. Maybe. Depends on a few things. Anything I should know about? Tank looked at Doc, this man who'd shared his shelter, his coffee, his stories with a complete stranger. Just some brothers who might want to meet you. Doc raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. He'd learned long ago that some questions were better left unasked until the answers were ready to be given. At 11:15 a.m., Tank's phone rang. We're on. Bull's voice crackled through the speaker. But we're doing this right. Full patch. How many? Started with our chapter. Word spread. Last count was 380 confirmed, maybe more on the way. Tank felt his chest tighten. 380 bikers was more than a ride. It was a statement. Bull, what did you tell them? Told them the truth. Army medic, 2 tours Vietnam, Bronze Star, living rough for 3 years. Gave shelter to one of ours during a storm. Code says we take care of those who take care of our own. When? Hour and a half. We're staging at the truck stop on I-44. Full dress, full respect. This old soldier's about to learn what brotherhood really means. At 12:47 p.m., Doc was sharing a can of soup with Tank when they heard it. A sound like distant thunder, but rhythmic, purposeful. It grew steadily louder until it became unmistakable, the synchronized rumble of dozens of motorcycle engines. Doc looked at Tank, who was checking his phone with barely contained excitement. Tank, what's happening? Doc, remember when you asked what would happen if things were different? If you had options? The rumble was getting louder, closer. Doc could feel the vibration in the concrete beneath his feet. Those are your options coming. The first bike rounded the corner at 12:53 p.m. A massive Harley ridden by a bear of a man with a gray beard and the kind of presence that commanded attention. Behind him came another, then another, until the street filled with a river of chrome and leather. Tank stood and waved. The lead rider, Bull Richardson himself, pulled up near the overpass and dismounted. The rest of the formation followed suit in perfect synchronization, engines falling silent until the only sound was the echo of their arrival bouncing off concrete walls. Doc stood slowly, his eyes wide as he took in the sight. 380 Hells Angels, standing in formation, all looking at him with expressions of respect that he hadn't seen directed his way in 3 years. Bull approached first, his massive frame somehow managing to convey both power and gentleness. He stopped 3 feet from Doc and executed a perfect military salute. Samuel Patterson, United States Army, 1st Infantry Division, Vietnam veteran. Bronze Star recipient. Thank you for your service, brother. Doc's hand moved automatically to return the salute, muscle memory, from 50 years ago taking over. Around him, 380 bikers snapped to attention and rendered the same honor. For a moment, Doc was 19 again, stepping off a transport plane in Vietnam, scared and proud and ready to serve his country. Then he was back to being 68, homeless, confused, watching an army of bikers show him more respect than he'd received since the day he'd pinned on his uniform for the last time. "I don't understand," Doc said, his voice barely audible. Tank stepped forward. "Last night, you gave shelter to a brother. Fed him, kept him warm, shared your stories. The code is simple, Doc. We take care of those who take care of our own." Bull reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Brother, this is from every chapter in Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas, and Missouri. Every man here contributed. It's enough for first month's rent, security deposit, and some furniture for wherever you want to call home." Doc stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "I can't accept this." "You're not accepting charity," Bull said quietly. "You're accepting brotherhood. You served your country. You helped our brother. You've earned this 10 times over." Another biker stepped forward, younger, with kind eyes and grease under his fingernails. "Sir, my name's Tommy. I'm a mechanic, but I also work with a veterans housing program. We've got a one-bedroom apartment waiting for you. Furnished, paid up for 6 months. After that, the system." Doc's legs gave out. He sat down hard on his milk crate, the envelope clutched in trembling hands. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Tank replied. "Just let us do what brothers do." What happened next would be remembered in brotherhood lore for decades. 380 bikers transformed from an intimidating formation into an efficient moving crew. They loaded Doc's possessions, all of them, everything he owned, with a reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. The apartment Tommy had mentioned was a small one-bedroom unit in a complex specifically designated for veterans. Clean, safe, with a view of a small park where Doc could sit and watch children play. The bikers filled it with furniture, kitchen supplies, clothes, and enough food to stock a small grocery store. But more than the physical gifts, they gave Doc something he'd lost 3 years ago. They gave him purpose. The job at the VA wasn't charity. It was recognition that his experience, including his time on the streets, made him uniquely qualified to help other veterans who were struggling. As the afternoon wore on, and the apartment filled with the sounds of assembly and organization, Doc found himself in conversation after conversation with bikers who wanted to hear his stories, share their own, and welcome him into their extended family. "Why?" Doc asked Bull as they stood on the apartment's small balcony, watching the organized chaos below. "I'm just one old soldier." Bull looked at him with eyes that had seen 40 years of brotherhood. "Doc, yesterday you were just surviving. Today you're living. Tomorrow you're going to help other people make that same journey. That's not just one old soldier, that's hope." Tank appeared in the doorway. "Doc, there's someone here to see you." Doc turned to find a young man in army fatigues, probably mid-20s, with haunted eyes and fresh scars on his face. He stood at attention, nervous but determined. "Sir, my name is Specialist Rodriguez. I just got back from my 3rd deployment to Afghanistan. I'm having some trouble adjusting, and they said you might be able to help." Doc looked at the young soldier, saw himself 50 years ago, scared and proud, and trying to figure out how to live with what he'd seen and done. He felt something stir in his chest. Purpose, meaning, the feeling of being needed again. "Come on in, son," Doc said. "Let's talk." 6 months later, Doc Patterson was sitting in his office at the VA hospital, reviewing case files for the day's appointments. The walls were decorated with commendations from his military service, photos from brotherhood events, and letters from veterans he'd helped navigate the system. His apartment had become a second home for struggling vets, a place where they could find understanding, practical help, and proof that it was possible to rebuild a life even when everything seemed lost. Tank stopped by every Tuesday, usually bringing other brothers who wanted to meet the legendary Doc Patterson, the man who'd given shelter to a biker and discovered that kindness, when given freely, returns multiplied. But Doc's greatest satisfaction came from the young veterans he counseled, men and women who reminded him of himself at their age. When they asked how he'd survived his own dark times, he always gave the same answer: You look for someone who needs help more than you do. Then you help them. That's how you find your way back to being human. The Brotherhood had saved Doc, but in saving him, they'd saved everyone he would go on to help. One act of kindness during a storm had created a ripple that would continue spreading for years to come. And under a concrete overpass on the outskirts of Tulsa, where two veterans had once shared coffee and stories during a storm, a small plaque now hung on the concrete wall in memory of brotherhood, where shelter was given freely and returned 100-fold. The storm had passed, but the lost singly, warmth remained. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.